Moving on to 7.02, resolution to approve the updated 5-year forecast for fiscal years 2015 through FY19. Bart, I'm sorry, may I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
What I was going to say, do you want to take a minute and?
Yeah, let me
Okay, yes.
fix something here. Okay, Mrs. Davidson, members of the board, this is the updated 5-year forecast. Statutorily, I'm going to find my clicker here. Statutorily, we do this twice a year. Purpose of the presentation basically is we submit to the state of Ohio. They review it to see if there's any issues, to see if they need to place this in fiscal emergency, fiscal caution, whatnot. But statutorily, we have to do this twice a year. I know for the board, I've seen this multiple times, but I always try to make this an educational process for anybody watching it. So I kind of repeat the same thing, so you guys will get in a pattern. We have to do this by October 31st of every year and May 31st of every year, and it's filed with the state of Ohio. We also have it on our webpage. Once this is done, you can click on from our webpage as well. What I try to do for here, and I know probably if you're in the back, you're not going to be able to see it, but what I try to do, make sure everybody understands at least how to read this when you see it. On the left side, my clicker's not, where's my, you guys aren't going to see that. The clicker's not very strong. All right. Right on the left side here, this is the list of just the revenue, where the revenue sources come from. It's right in through here. And the way you read it, these 3 years are the past 3 years. So if you want to know what lines correspond to what fiscal year, those are the 3 years, which are right here, 3 years. The yellow line is the current fiscal year we're in, and the next 4 are the projected years, which is part of the forecast. And in this case, and I'll explain a little bit later, those 4 years, we don't know what the state's doing with those 4 years. So there's one line we kind of assume. For the other lines, we believe that we have them pretty close. To give you a little line by line, to show you what the differences are from what we said in October versus what we said now. For the board, what I did here, this top row is the new forecast. It's an updated forecast. This bottom row tells you what we had numbers in October, and this number to the right of it tells you what is currently in May. So there's, for the board, there's October. So basically, between the two, we're up $941,000. Basically, it's just because 98.8% of the taxes were collected in that year. So it was a good turnout for the city of Westerville taxpayers. So that's the reason we're up. You can see the difference, 941,000, but you can see as we go across, and I will point this out to you, as we go across this line, you can say, well, how do we go from 104 million in 2017, which is for you guys right there, to in 2019, we're at 91,000. And 18, we're at 97. The emergency levy cannot be, expires in calendar year 17. And by law, we can't assume the passage of that levy. So that's why you see the numbers decrease on the real estate, is we can't assume that the levy is going to pass or be renewed. So that's why you see the numbers are declining. The next line is tangible personal property, homestead rollback. We actually received this money from the state. We're actually only off on this line, actually $35,000. So it's not bad. It's pretty good. Keep in mind the homestead rollback, we used to get about $5.4 million on this line item when the state changed it. So when you hear the state talking about tangible personal property, it doesn't really apply to us anymore from what they used to get from the businesses. Westerville was eliminated about 3 years ago. We used to, and again, it started back in '06. They started the process of eliminating it. And then a couple years ago, we lost it all. So just picture what we could have done with $5.4 million every year, which we don't have. But tangible personal property is pretty much on schedule. And also, I will point out, the emergency levy that we're collecting, the state is paying the homestead rollback on on that levy. One of the things that the state changed a couple years ago was any new levy passed, I think it was after November 2013, I believe, the state is not paying that the rollback on that anymore, the 10%, the share that they would pay. One of the advantages, if the board so chooses to renew that our emergency levy, because it's a renewal of a levy that was prior to the new law, the state continues to pay that on our behalf. So that's one pro for it. The next line is the state foundation, and the state foundation basically is what we receive from the state. The funding formula currently is $5,800 per pupil, which means because of the way we are funded, this district receives about $2,343 per student of that $5,800, because that's what the state share for this district is. Everything else is collected locally. Okay, now going forward, and I'll show you in a picture in a minute. Thanks, Joe. Going forward, in fiscal year 2015, which is the year we're in, that's the last year that the state has their 2-year biennium. So in our forecast, we projected fiscal year 16, 17, 18, and 19 as though we would see 1.5% increase in state revenue funding. Currently, we didn't put in the forecast because it's not in law, but currently the state's talking, originally the original House version said we were going to receive, I think it was 10% again, and then it got reduced in the subversion to 7.5. Keep in mind, we only have in our forecast 1.5, and I've got an example we'll show you what that dollar figure is here in a little bit. But just so you know, on this forecast, we only updated what we had in the forecast in October versus now. We didn't include going forward because we don't know what the state's going to do with that. So here's what the state looks like. You have an unrestricted aid and you have restricted aid. And you can see that we're up a little bit in the, I guess let me point here, in the unrestricted aid, we're up about 112,000. In the restricted aid, we're up about 274,000. They made some adjustments in there, is why we're up in those lines. But if you look at the lines above it, and I know the audience isn't going to be able to see a lot of these lines here, but we roughly this year we got $37.4 million from the state. We're projected to get 37.8 next year and 38. So we projected about a 1.5% increase each year is what's in our forecast. Once the biennium is approved and we go to the October forecast, these numbers will be updated in October. Other revenue. This is one of the lines where we're actually up $1.2 million. And one of the things that make this number up, which is hard to figure out, is this is the biggest lines we had in here is called refund from prior year expenditures. We got a check back from Franklin County Auditor for about $409,000. It was money that they had billed us a few years ago when they did reappraisal. It didn't cost them what they thought it was going to cost, so we got that money back, but because it was prior year, it goes on this line of $405. From State Teachers Retirement System, we got a refund of $522,000, and that was from the prior year bills. We try to set up the bills we think we're going to pay. Well, anyway, that was, so those two lines right there are over $900,000. So that's what kind of makes up the other. So that one's a hard one to predict. We don't expect to get either one of those again. That's why you can see it going back next year. It drops back. It stayed the same really at 6.3. We don't expect much increase. Well, we don't expect an increase in that line.
Can I interrupt?
Sure,
one
absolutely.
question?
I'm sorry.
I just wondered if you have any idea of why State Teachers Retirement gave back $500,000.
Well, it had to do with a lot of retirements. What we do is we do a projection of salary throughout the year. You don't know who's going to retire, so you basically pay it up front. And so when it's all done, they do a true up to see, okay, what did you overpay? What did you underpay? And so that's the reason. It was just a difference from what was projected to be paid. You don't know who's going to retire, and so you set it up as though they're still coming back. When we do our report to the state, we say, here's how much salaries we're going to spend next year. But if people retire in those years, you don't pay up that salary in technically, but we're still set up to pay the same amount for the next year.
So we pay based on an estimate then?
Right, we estimate STRS and SERS.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so what I gave you here is basically the general fund. You can see it's sort of a summary of the general fund for here. This column, where's my pointer? the pointer right here, this is the dollar difference. You can see we had 941,000. This column here is the differences. We had 941,000 in property tax. You can see basically for the funds, we were up $2.3 million between really the biggest players was the real estate tax and the other revenue was the difference. So we're up $2.3 million in revenue from what we said we were going to do in October. This was just kind of a summary page. If you guys have questions, I forgot to tell you, if you guys have questions, stop me and we'll certainly explain them. What I gave you here, and I know you can't see this on the back row, but if you download the program, you can. This is basically to go on to expenditure side. I tried to give everybody, these are all the expenditure lines on this side. Again, you've got the 3 past years, you've got the current fiscal year, and you've got the next 4 years. And so this is basically what we're going to talk about next line by line. This just has the dollar figures in it. So what's in the personal services line? Basically, the salaries reflect the annual cost of experience. We had built in the 5-year forecast basically 2% raises for the teaching staff for the next 4 years. That doesn't mean that that's what you're going to negotiate. It's just an assumption. You could put in 0. You could put in 5. We put in 2 as an assumption as a placeholder. So that's in the 5-year forecast as we go across. We also have a line item in there, this equivalent of $450,000. We put in there the additional of 10 FTEs. We basically said, 10 teachers, I think it was a master's 3, it was 45,000. We basically put $450,000 in there for potential staffing changes each year of the 5-year forecast. So it's not just 10 this year and you don't do anything. We put them in there as an assumption for 10 each year over the next 4 years. Doesn't mean you have to spend it. Just means we've allocated it in case you want to change programming and whatnot. We also made some adjustments this past year into personal services with people who had retired the last couple years. We'll also, in October, make some adjustments going forward for the 50-some staff members that just retired this year. Because in our October forecast, those teachers were assumed to just continue working. So when we do our October forecast, these numbers will drop again because those 50-some teachers will be backed out of the next forecast. So that's on the personal services line. Again, this is what we had in there, the forecast this year. You can see the updated version across the top here. The difference between October and this year was 1.3. And I tried to go back, and there's really not one thing. In the forecast, we had an estimated payroll each year, and we were off about $100,000 each year. So cumulative, it's 1.3 million. There really wasn't anything. Sorry about that. There really wasn't one thing in there that I could find that caused that other than just our assumptions we had for every payroll. Excuse me. Retirement insurance benefits, the 187 kind of correlates to the overages in personnel because whatever you have in salaries is multiplied times your retirements. And so this number was off by $187,000. Mainly for those. Keep in mind, we are self-insured. January 1st, 2013, we became self-insured. We had a good year at the end of 13. We had a good year in 14, and we're projected to have another good year this year. But in our forecast, we always assume, the industry standard always says, well, you got to plan for 10% increase every year. Well, keep in mind, that's $1.6 million each year that's in our forecast that may or may not happen. We put it in there as a placeholder. So even though for 15, it worked out, I think we were at 5.1 this year, we'll see what December brings or October brings. We'll know by October what the insurance rates are going to be for next year. We have 10s in there for 16, 17, 18, 19. So those could change. We'll probably change 16. The other ones will remain 10. But those are the assumptions we have in there. Purchase services, we're within 105,000. There's not a whole lot to say in there. We assume about a 1.5% increase every year. We're pretty much on track for that one. Supplies and materials are up this year. Really the biggest thing I could find in there was we did purchase more workbooks for our students this year. And so I think those changes have us up a little bit right now. Okay, Tracy? Workbooks, and workbooks in this one here. Well, and plus if you buy Chromebooks, sometimes they're out of here as well. The law changed a few years ago. You used to buy computers out of 600s, capital expenditures, but because they're so cheaper now, a lot of them come out of here. And I know we're up in Chromebooks on this line as well. we still anticipate about a 3% increase each year going forward in the 5-year forecast. And again, these are assumptions. So between now and October, if the board says, you know what, I think you ought to do 4 or 2 or whatever, share with me what your thoughts are, because this is really your forecast as well. Yeah, I put it together, but it's, you guys are helping me as well.
So Bart, just on the 3% year-on-year increase, is that just indexed to assumed inflation?
It is.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
Capital outlay, we really didn't, what we said we were going to spend in October, we really didn't change that. We're pretty much on track with that. The biggest player in that number is the technology roadmap, but we really aren't expecting any dollar change in that. Those are pretty much what we think we're going to spend. Other objects, again, are like Educational Service Center, we pay for substitutes, we pay Franklin, Delaware County auditors, treasurer's fees, any win-win cases. We're actually down in those fees as well from what we anticipated. But that's sort of a hodgepodge of different fees. Transfers out, the transfers out, we pretty much have really a couple. We transfer $65,000 each year into a permanent improvement fund for turf replacement. We also, now going forward, I will say going forward, just if you remember, we had a meeting a couple months ago where we were going to take $3 million from the permanent improvement, which was curriculum and technology, and move that into this line. This does not reflect that at this time. This is only the update from October. From last October. When we get ready to do the next one, you'll see a $3 million change, and it's not necessarily going to be as a transfer out. Kind of got behind on that a little bit. The transfer out, we're not transferring from the general fund. We're actually just trading costs from the general fund. We're actually billing it, and that's actually going to mean capital outlay and supplies. So not really the transfer. I forgot to mention that back, but transfers are pretty much we just transfer money out. Okay, and the other transfer that you'll see in the general fund, if we have free and reduced students that don't pay fees, we transfer money from the general fund into the 009 fund, which pays for those fees. So that's where the transfers come from. And this report, again, the people in the back aren't going to be able to see it, but if you download the report, you will. This is just a summary sheet of just the expenditures. And what I tried to do on the top line, even to help a little bit, this top line, this gray line, actually I brought in the revenue line. You can see the revenue was up $2.3 million. The expenditures cost us $1.5 million more. So really, the general fund balance is actually still going up $807,000 on this report. So the difference really is 1%. Okay, what else I got? All right, revenue overview. Again, this just talks about when the state passed they made a funding change back in 13 for fiscal years 14 and 15. That's what this forecast is basically showing. We had put a revenue cap of 1.5 or 1.5% on those reports. The state came in and gave us better than expected. They actually gave us 6.25% in fiscal year 14 and 10.5% in fiscal year 15. The forecast models, again, 1.5% cap in 16 through 19, but the state is working on a new funding formula, which will be effective July 1st, 2015, which will be part of the updated forecast in October. So it's just interesting. I always hate putting my name on something that I don't know what's in law. So that's why you don't see the increase in here. It's not in law yet. The districts, again, I've made a note too, the district's 2012 emergency levy is expected to provide a full 5-year life cycle, which will need to be renewed in calendar year 2017 if the board so chooses to do that. By law, and I'll double check it, I believe you can go, because it is an emergency levy, you can actually go in November of 16. You get it one extra shot because it's technically emergency levy. So I checked with the city. The city doesn't have any levies on in 16 of November. So if the board so chooses, that would be a decent time to put one on. It just gives you one more shot of trying to pass a levy in case it doesn't pass. And it would just be a renewal. Without the renewal levy, the district is projected to experience $25 million shortfall in revenue, which means we'll be spending more than we're bringing in. But keep in mind, in 19, you're going to lose $24 million in revenue cumulative. expenditure overview, staffing increases, again, we're allocating, we have 10 additional teachers in each of the 5-year forecast. Health insurance premiums increased 5.1%. The allocation of $600,000 for additional health insurance, we ended up paying about $300,000 to the Affordable Care Act as a fee to be part of that. So we didn't pay the 600, we paid about 300,000 of that. Purchase services are expected to go between 1.5 and 3. I know in purchase services this year, we did have an increase because of the cold winter. I know we had to move some money into electricity and gas because buildings required some additional heating. So we did move them, but for going forward, we'll probably put the same levels back that we had because we're not expecting another bad year. In my crystal ball.
Yeah.
What I did here, this is a summary sheet, and again, I know you're going to be hard to see on this one. This is the summary sheet. I basically took the summary sheets that have the revenues up here. It has this green line is the line I always look for. I should find it on my report. The green line is the line I look at because that tells you how much you're either spending or collecting more than you're bringing in. And in 2017, I think, like Dr. Kellogg, you have to read it. I think we have $5 million of this. Is like, we have we're actually still bringing in $5 million more in 17. In 18, we're actually spending 9.7 more. But keep in mind, we lose $8 million in the forecast because we can't assume the passage of a levy. And in this number here, we're spending $25 million more. But keep in mind, cumulative value is $24 million. So we're actually, if the levy were to be renewed, you're still close to be bringing in as much as you're expending. And there's ways we can challenge that to try to keep those numbers sustainable. But this was sort of a summary sheet that you guys, that I gave you. We still, in the fact that down here, this bottom line, actually, if you look at this line, even in fiscal year 19, I think that says $45 million. Keep in mind, that's what your cash balance is. But from there, we take away the $1.5 million, which is this line here for you guys, $1.5 million in encumbrances that are basically our checks that we still have to write for the year. And then we still have the budget reserve of $19 million, which is a 45-day cash supply if something were to go wrong. So that basically tells you that you have $24 million available that you could spend. And again, if the levy passes, you'll be back to $49 million. But that just gives you a summary sheet. Let's go to the next page. This one, I know you guys can't read this one. What I tried to do is if you download this, and it's actually in your board docs, but if you download this, this is a sheet that actually shows the levy that is included in the 5-year forecast as though it wasn't taken out. So when you look at this report, these numbers up here on top actually show the emergency levy up here. Those numbers are actually included in there. We didn't take them out so that you could see what it would look like without it. The state, remember I told you the state was going through their budget process? The state of Ohio originally in 2015 is this blue line here, so conceptually you can see the blue line. This is what the state predicted for 15. We projected a 1.5% increase for 16 and 17. When the Senate bill first came out in 2016, they projected these gold lines a 10% increase each year. This is what these lines were. And then the other bill came out and said, no, we can't do that. We're going to drop them to, I think it was 7.5. And so that's what these numbers are. And I did the quick calculations. If the first House bill came out, we would have gotten a 10%. We would have seen a $2.9 million increase in this district from what we have in the 5-year forecast in fiscal year 16. And we would have seen an additional $2.9 million, which cumulative gives you $6.3 million. If we would have gotten a 10%. With the new House, the sub-House bill recommendations, they're only projecting us at 7.5%, which is the $2 million down here, and then an additional $2 million the next year, which cumulative value is $4.4 million. So over the life of the 5-year forecast, even if we get the lower amount that the state's going to do, roughly that's a cumulative of, I think, I mean, calculations between $16 and $20 million. I forget what the number was. Cumulative over the next 4 years. So it'll be interesting to see if it holds true. I hope it does, but we won't know until they pass it. But we're still looking pretty good from through the state's eyes. And I think, John, the reason that they did that, they changed Was it the ability to pay, or I forget what factor they changed on here, to try to even things out a little bit?
Yeah, the main factor was district's ability to pay and how they're calculating it. There was two descriptors, but in both the original governor's budget and then in the House budget, which modified the governor's budget in regard to determining the state share or our local ability to pay, the change in the metric they used in both ends, in the original budget from the governor, we fared really well. In the revised budget from the House, we fared just under really well. And so now it's back to the Senate. But that's, and everybody I've listened to say that's been the major change, is how they're going to calculate the state share or what they determine to be your local ability to pay. But in both cases, we've come out on the positive end.
Right, okay, thank you. So anyway, I threw this in, and if you guys want to look, you can see what the difference is in the versions. I'd take either version. It'd be nice to have the first one, but I think you're going to end up with the second one.
Yeah.
This is just, for those who download it, conceptually, that's what the forecast looks like. That's what we actually send to the state of Ohio. I know you can't read it, but you can see visually what it looks like, so when you get a copy of it. This is the financial stability. When we put $19 million in, this was a 45-day cash flow. You can see the green line basically is that, green line is that actual $19 million that we have in place. And you can see how much cash we have over that line. But this represents the $19 million, that line right there. This just gives you a general fund breakout. The blue line, which this is for general fund up here, the blue line is 63% real estate. This number is 63%. This number right there is 63%. The unrestricted aid, which is the state aid, is 23%, which is that line right there. And then with property tax allocation, which really is also state paid, is the yellow line, is 8%. So that's kind of the biggest pieces of the general fund makeup that we have. You can see our real estate taxes are still by far the largest. The general fund expenditures, the blue line here is 57%. That's this line. If I can get over here to these guys. Right there, that's the line, 57%. The benefits are, oh, here, you know what? They didn't change it for you guys. I'm looking at my screen. Sorry, guys. These are general fund expenditures. The salaries right here are 57%, the blue line. The red line up here, benefits are at 20%, and the purchase services are at 13%. Those make up the biggest lines. The other expenditure, just so everybody knows where it says 6%, about $4 million of that is Franklin County ESC that we get our substitutes from. So really, if you're out there and you say, well, you got 57% and 20%, you probably got another 3% that we pay cumulative to the ESC if you're looking at total salaries that everybody pays, because we do get our substitutes from the ESC. And I think that's it. It is. Any questions, comments?
Just a quick comment. It's important for people to remember that when we talk about the pending increase in state aid, it's only for the state aid portion of our budget.
Correct.
So, I don't want people to think that we're looking at a 7% or 7.5% overall. It's still hefty, and I really like it, and I'm very thankful that they're looking at it the way they are, but it is only for that portion of our dollars that comes from the state.
That's correct. And that's state unrestricted, which means you can
Right.
spend it for anything. We do get restricted grants, but that's different. This is state aid, which is unrestricted. Anybody else have any questions?
Just probably just a couple of quick comments. I mean, the first is that, again, I think that the board has been diligent around, fiscal responsibility as it relates in particular to our operating reserve. I think that number, it seems like a big number, but I think you framed it well in reminding us that's 45 days. That's keeping extra in the checking account home to make sure that we can cover the bills. And I think that's worked well for us. I think the other thing with the state that's interesting is that I think it's disappointing that once again, the state is not taking steps to fix the school funding model in general. I always like to take the moment to say that if we had been found to have not done our jobs by the state Supreme Court more than 4 times, which is the case with the state legislature, we wouldn't have our jobs. Unfortunately, nobody wants to pick up that ball and fix that situation. I do think that the state legislature, at least with the House and with the governor's office, has made an attempt to provide more parity and also to account for the fact that we have more of our income tax dollars that go out of our community that don't get returned to educate our students. I think that there's some thinking going on about that, mainly because of pressure from constituents that are, finally raising points about what is going on with this model and why aren't we fixing it. I think there are a lot of good signs as it relates to what the state is attempting to do. I think it's a good first step. I think it bodes well for the district. But back to taking our positions and taking a 2-year emergency to 5 years from an operating standpoint, to reducing our overall expenses in several different categories, and that 45-day operating reserve, I think we've positioned ourselves well from a fiscal standpoint in terms of fiscal health and accountability. So thank you, Bart. I appreciate all the work that you do on this.
Welcome. Any other questions? Yeah, let me do.
No, really, I just want to thank you for the way you do this each time, really. This is almost over my head. It's not quite, and it's not because of the way you do it. So I want to thank you on that. Echoing, we're just trying to be as fiscally wise as we can while we're waiting for other entities to also be wise in their legislation. So I think we're moving the ball forward in the right direction.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
We call roll.
Yep.
Dr. French,
Yes.
Mr. Byrd,
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker,
Yes.
Mr. Velardo,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson.
Yes. Thanks, Bart.